Welcome back to DT101. This is Lecture 4, Ideate. If empathize was about listening and define was about sharpening your focus, then Ideate is where you finally get to let loose. We're going to spend this lecture talking about how to generate a large, diverse pool of ideas, and then how to make sense of them without losing your best ones in the process. There are more methods here than we'll cover today, but by the end you'll have a solid toolkit and, more importantly, you'll understand the underlying logic that makes ideation actually work. We're now at the midpoint of the course. Lectures 1 through 3 took us through the front end, understanding users, and framing the right problem. Ideation is the bridge. Once we've done this, Lectures 5 and 6 will move into prototype and test, where the ideas we generate today become something you can actually put in front of a real person. So this lecture sits at a pivotal moment. It's where everything you learned in empathize and define gets converted into creative energy. Here's the most important concept in this entire lecture, so I want to spend a moment on it. Your brain has two distinct modes when it comes to ideas. Divergent thinking is generative, it suspends judgment, welcomes wild ideas, and chases volume. Convergent thinking is evaluative, it filters, compares, and selects. Both modes are essential. The problem is that most teams try to run both simultaneously, and that is exactly what kills good ideas. The moment someone says yes, but that won't work during a brainstorm, the divergent thinking stops, not just for them, but for everyone in the room. The rule is simple: generate first, judge later. Volume is your goal at this stage, because the research is consistent, the best ideas rarely appear before idea number 30 or 40. Your how might we question is the creative brief for this whole session, and you need to treat it that way. Start every ideation session by reading the HMW out loud, not silently. There's something about saying it aloud that keeps the whole team anchored to the actual human need you're designing for. Every single idea generated should connect back to that question. And here's a useful trick: if you find the whole team getting stuck, don't just push harder with the same HMW. Try reframing it slightly and see if the ideas start flowing again. A good HMW question should feel slightly uncomfortable. If it's too easy, it's too narrow. Brainstorming has a bad reputation, and honestly, most of the time it's deserved. The reason it fails isn't that the technique is wrong, it's that teams skip the rules. The rules exist to protect divergent thinking from social pressure. Deferring judgment means even positive feedback like "ooh, great idea," can narrow what people suggest next. Building on others with yes, and rather than yes, but keeps the energy additive rather than subtractive. Staying focused on the HMW prevents the session from drifting into complaining about unrelated things. And setting a volume target, 50 ideas before you even think about filtering, forces quantity over quality, which counterintuitively produces better quality in the end. Crazy eights is probably the most immediately practical technique in this lecture. Here's how it works: take a single sheet of paper, fold it in half 3 times, then unfold it. You now have 8 panels. Set a timer for 1 minute per panel. In each minute, you sketch one idea. That's 8 ideas in 8 minutes. The constraint is intentional, you don't have time to second-guess yourself. And the visual-only rule is important too. If you're writing paragraphs, you're explaining rather than imagining. Sketches force you to commit to a shape, a flow, a concept. You'll almost certainly produce 2 or 3 ideas you'd never have thought of if you'd been sitting there with a blank page and all the time in the world. SCAMPER is a structured technique for breaking out of mental ruts. Each letter is a lens: substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to other uses, eliminate, reverse. What makes it powerful is the discipline of applying each lens methodically. Take the example on the slide. Substitute: what if the interface was voice only, with no screen? Combine: what if the checkout process was also the onboarding experience, so you earn trust at the same moment you ask for payment? Adapt: what can we borrow from hospital handover protocols for our complex onboarding flow? Eliminate: what if we removed account creation entirely? Each lens forces you to question an assumption you didn't even know you were holding. This is my personal favorite technique, and it never fails to unlock a room. Instead of asking for good ideas, you ask for the worst ideas imaginable. Make the experience as frustrating as possible. Ensure nobody can find the button. Charge users for every mistake. Design the most bewildering navigation you can imagine. What happens next is fascinating. People start laughing, the tension drops, and ideas start flowing freely. But more importantly, once you have your list of terrible ideas, you ask what makes each one bad, and each answer to that question is a design principle in disguise. The worst idea that hides the button longest reveals a principle: clarity and speed matter. Fear of being wrong is one of the biggest blockers in creative sessions. Going worst first removes that fear entirely. One of the most powerful sources of ideas is somewhere you'd never normally look: a completely different industry. Hospitals use pre-surgery checklists to prevent human error during high-stakes moments, and that same principle applies directly to complex onboarding flows where users are nervous and making irreversible choices. Airlines pre-board passengers who need extra time, and that same consideration can inform how you design a sign-up flow for first-time users who are overwhelmed. Libraries create silent zones to enable deep work, and that same idea can inspire a focus mode state in your product. Hotels hand you a key within minutes of arrival, with minimal friction, and that experience sets the bar for how your users should feel when they first access your product. The question isn't what should our product do? It's who has already solved a version of this problem, and what can we steal from them? The shift from generating to selecting is one of the most underrated moments in the ideation process, and it needs to be deliberate. Don't let convergence creep in gradually. That's how great ideas get quietly buried. Instead, make a clear announcement: we're switching modes now. Then, before any voting or filtering, group similar ideas visually on the wall. This does two things: it reduces duplication so people don't feel their idea was ignored, and it reveals clusters of thinking that might point toward a stronger composite concept. And critically, keep everything visible. Don't throw anything away. The idea that looks ridiculous at this stage sometimes becomes the most important one 3 iterations later. Voting is simple, fast, and remarkably effective. Everyone gets 3 to 5 sticky dots. All voting happens simultaneously and in silence. This is non-negotiable, because if people vote after watching others, you've just recreated the loudest voice problem. Dots can stack, so if someone feels very strongly about one idea, they can put all their dots on it. The rule is, no discussion until every single dot is placed. What you're left with is a visual map of the group's collective priorities, and it's genuinely surprising how often the consensus differs from what you'd have predicted going in. Discussion then becomes much more productive because it's grounded in visible, shared data rather than competing opinions. Once you've voted, you need a framework for deciding what to actually do with the top ideas. The 2x2 impact/effort matrix is one of the simplest and most useful tools in the product designer's toolkit. Draw 2 axes: impact on the vertical, effort on the horizontal. High impact, low effort, these are your quick wins, and you do them first. High impact, high effort, these are your big bets, worth planning carefully but not rushing into. Low impact, low effort, fill-ins, things you can pick up when you have slack. And low impact, high effort, these are traps. They consume resources and deliver little. The matrix forces an honest conversation about the relationship between ambition and cost, and it makes prioritization explicit rather than political. 3 things to carry forward. First, always separate divergent and convergent thinking, never mix modes, even when it feels slow. Second, when a team is stuck, Crazy 8s and SCAMPER are your fastest routes back to momentum. They work because they impose constraints that stop overthinking. Third, voting and the 2x2 matrix aren't just facilitation tricks, they make selection democratic and transparent, which builds team buy-in for the ideas that move forward. In our next lecture, we move into prototype, where the ideas you just generated become something real and testable. The question shifts from what might work, to what can we build in a day that will help us find out. Let's close with 3 questions to sit with. The first, why does even positive feedback, like that's a great idea. Kill divergent thinking? Think about what it signals to the rest of the group about which ideas are acceptable. The second, pick any everyday frustration you have right now. Can you generate 8 rough ideas to address it in 2 minutes? Give it a try and notice what surprises you. And the third, when you're sitting in front of 50 ideas, what criteria should guide your selection? Is it feasibility? User impact? Innovation? Who gets to decide? These are the kinds of conversations that separate teams that consistently produce good work from those that consistently produce safe work.